I wanted to read this that I found. This is from Reproductive Health Matters. Sexual torture of Palestinian men by Israeli authorities. I think these things need to be exposed. This was in the past, of course. But this needs to be shown that that the Israelis, over the Zionist Israelis over in Israel, are nothing but a bunch of thugs, tyrants from hell, who treat the Palestinians like shit, and have for many decades. So, Sexual Torture of Palestinian Men by Israeli Authorities by Daniel J. N. Weishut, clinical psychologist and teaching associate, Bar Ilan University in Ramat Gan, Israel. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, arrests and imprisonment of Palestinian men in their early adulthood are common practice. The Public Committee Against Torture in Israel collected thousands of testimonies of Palestinian men allegedly tortured or ill-treated by Israeli authorities. There are many types of torture, sexual torture being one of them. This study is based on the PCATI database during 2005 and 2012, which contains 60 cases, 4% of all files in this period, with testimonies of alleged sexual torture or ill treatment. It is the first in the investigation of torture and ill treatment of a sexual nature allegedly carried out by Israeli security authorities of Palestinian men. Findings show that sexual ill treatment is systematic, with 36 reports of verbal sexual harassment either directed toward Palestinian men and boys or toward family members. 35 reports of forced nudity. Sounds exactly like how we were treating the Iraqis in the camps, like in Abu Ghraib. Moreover, there are 6 testimonies of Israeli officials involved in physical sexual assault of arrested or imprisoned Palestinian men. Physical assault in most cases concerned pressing or kicking the genitals, while one testimony pertained to simulated rape, and another described an actual rape by means of a blunt object. The article provides illustrations of the various types of sexual torture and ill treatment of boys and men in the light of existing literature and recommendations. 2015, Reproductive Health Matters, published by Elsevier, BV, all rights reserved. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an enduring armed conflict receiving much international attention. In the realm of this conflict, large numbers of Palestinian men are arrested and detained by Israeli security forces each year. In 2014 alone, Israeli authorities held some 500 Palestinians in administrative detention without trial. Thousands of other Palestinians were serving prison terms. Torture and ill treatment of detained Palestinians are prevalent. Even though Israel has ratified the UN Convention Against Torture, 1986 and 1991, prohibited the use of several forms of torture, and promulgated national laws against sexual harassment and abuse, Israeli authorities admit interrogators employ exceptional, quote-unquote, interrogation methods and physical pressure in ticking bomb situations, but claim that this is done out of necessity and do not call these methods torture. Others have claimed that the term ticking bomb is used much too broadly and that this ruling de facto institutionalizes torture by Israeli authorities. According to the United Nations Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, torture means any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him for an act he or a third person has committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind. When such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of, or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity. It does not include pain or suffering arising only from, inherent in, or incidental to lawful sanctions. The difference between torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment lies in the intensity of the suffering and the purpose, but for practical reasons, international bodies relate to the two prohibitions without differentiation. The reason for doing so is that there is a cumulative effect in which a combination of incidents or ill treatment or prolonged periods of ill treatment can amount to torture. Contextual factors need to be taken into account as well, since they mediate the perceived severity of the stressor and whether it could be considered torture. Moreover, an international study focused on the differentiation between ill treatment and torture concluded that ill treatment in captivity does not seem to be substantially different from physical torture in terms of the severity of mental suffering they cause, the underlying mechanism of traumatic stress, and their long-term psychological outcome. The perpetrators involved in torture and ill treatment are those concerned directly with keeping public order in Israel, but occasionally physicians are reported as complicit in torture. Torture is generally concealed behind prison walls, but every so often, victims of torture are brought to Israeli emergency rooms, turn to a private lawyer, and or have their experiences documented by the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel. Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, PCATI, was established in 1990 as a non-governmental organization acting to increase public awareness of torture during interrogations or under other circumstances, prosecute the guilty parties, and eliminate legal use of torture and ill treatment. Its activities comprise legal advocacy, public engagement, and lobbying. It also functions as an information center. In Israel, victims of torture have the possibility to go to court and could be compensated if torture were established. However, in practice, torture allegations are dismissed without criminal investigation or rejected, and perpetrators are cleared, though in rare cases, soldiers are punished through a disciplinary system. In rare cases, rehabilitation and compensation based on allegations of torture are exceptional in spite of international recommendations. In fact, financial settlements were reached only for cases that took place in the 1980s and 1990s and included a clause absolving the state from declaring the plaintiff a victim of torture. As for the types of torture and ill treatment, the 2014 to 2015 Amnesty International report states, quote, Palestinian detainees continue to be tortured and otherwise ill-treated by Israeli security officials, particularly Internal Security Agency officials who frequently held detainees incommunicado during interrogation for days and sometimes weeks. Methods used include physical assault such as slapping and throttling, prolonged shackling and stress positions, sleep deprivation, and threats against the detainee and their family. The authorities failed to take adequate steps either to prevent torture or to conduct independent investigations when detainees allege torture, fueling a climate of impunity. Sexual violence is often thought of as mainly directed toward women, but in the last decade there has been a rising attention to sexual violence toward men in general and in the realm of political conflict in particular. Forms of sexual torture described in the research literature range from verbal sexual harassment through forced nudity to severe forms of genital violence such as squeezing the scrotum, rape, genital mutilation, and castration. Some studies relate to sexual violence in prisons. Others report on the detrimental mental health aspects, especially post-traumatic stress, difficulties in treatment and rehabilitation of violated men due to taboo around the subject, and some expose the human rights infringements by means of sexual abuse of men. The Manual on the Effective Investigation and Documentation of Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment claims that impairment of sexuality is among the many harmful sequelae of torture in general. In fact, sexual dysfunction is common among male torture survivors and may include decreased sexual interest, inability to trust a sexual partner, fear of or aversion to sexual activity, disturbance in arousal, and erectile dysfunction. Sexual violence in particular, which is often integrated in other forms of torture and ill treatment, may cause a variety of both physical and psychological symptoms. The Amnesty International report does not pertain to forms of sexual torture or ill treatment toward Palestinians detained in Israel. An earlier study in 2003 noted that 3 human rights organizations involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict recorded almost no cases of sexual assault, but did file reports of lesser instances of verbal sexual harassment. Since 2004, sexual torture in Israel has received media attention around the case of the then imprisoned Lebanese ML leader Mustafa Durrani. I might have pronounced that wrong, but you can read it. And his severe allegations of rape by Israeli security officers. In 2015, the Supreme Court rejected the case, although it did not dismiss the allegations, claiming that as an enemy, Durrani had no right to sue Israel. But this is not the only case of sexual torture. In fact, it was maintained that there are quite a few Palestinian men complaining about sexual torture and ill treatment during their arrest and imprisonment by Israeli authorities. Here's a picture here of Israeli forces arrest Palestinian youngster during a protest in the West Bank 2012. Sexual rights include the understanding that everyone shall be free from torture and cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment related to sexuality. These rights are grounded in basic human rights and essential for the achievement of the highest attainable sexual health. There is extensive evidence of torture of Palestinian detainees in arrest or prison at the hands of Israeli security forces. Sexual violence is often masked under the general term of torture, and it seems probable that if relevant questions were asked, more instances of sexual torture and ill treatment would be found. This qualitative study responds to the call for more systematic collection of data and detailed studies in the field of sexual violence against men and boys in the context of armed conflict. It aims at identifying sexual violence against male Palestinian detainees to reveal the extent and nature of sexual violence and ill treatment among collected reports as one component in a broader frame of torture perpetrated by Israeli authorities. PCATI's archive includes thousands of testimonies by Israelis, Palestinians, labor immigrants, and other foreigners of alleged torture and ill treatment by Israeli security authorities. The procedure at PCATI regarding these allegations is to obtain an affidavit or a testimony, preferably as complete as possible on the first visit. The interview is performed by a lawyer if the person is in prison, which is the most common situation, or by a trained field worker if the person is no longer detained, in which case it takes place in a mutually agreed location. The testimony is recorded in writing by the lawyer or field worker, either in Arabic or Hebrew, and the witness signs a consent form regarding its use for legal purposes, advocacy, or documentation and research. The testimony, if in Arabic, after translation to Hebrew, is then read by a third party who categorizes the types of abuse in the testimony: beating, sleep deprivation, threats, and so on. Those testifying do not receive any payment for their testimony. On the contrary, many of those no longer detained need to pay their own, for them substantial travel costs to reach someone from PCATI. For this study, we searched the PCATI archive for the following relevant keywords: undressing, threat of sexual assault, and sexual assault. We limited our search to testimonies of Palestinian men and boys submitted between 2005 and 2012. Testimonies were provided by Arab, predominantly Muslim men living in different regions in the occupied Palestinian territories, mostly from the West Bank. These selected testimonies were reviewed with a focus on the above-mentioned keywords and relevant parts marked. In each testimony, we counted only unique incidents of a sexual nature, i.e., incidents that were substantially different in circumstances. More incidents of the same nature by the same authorities were counted as one. We emphasize that these testimonies include documentation on many more incidents of torture and ill treatment, but for the purpose of this study, we focus on those of a sexual nature. We examine the diversity of sexual torture, or ill treatment concerning a variety of authorities. We also look to see whether there were any patterns of torture or ill treatment of a sexual nature. More than 1,500 testimonies were screened, of which less than 100 were by non-Palestinians. Of these 60 testimonies, about 4%, all provided by Palestinian boys and men concerning their detention, indicated incidents of sexual torture or ill treatment. Many of these testimonies included more than one such incident. Thus, in total, 77 incidents of sexual torture or ill treatment were identified. Incidents of sexual torture were embedded in other forms of torture and ill treatment not discussed here, occurring over altering periods of time, ranging from hours to weeks or even months. Victims of sexual torture and ill treatment were aged between 15 and 43 at the time of the incident, with the median age being 24. The majority, 43%, were aged 20 to 29, while 15% were minors, and 10% were 18 to 19 years old. 11 victims, 18%, were aged 30 to 39. 2 victims, 3%, were older, and information was missing for 6 victims, 10%. The occurrence of incidents of sexual torture and ill treatment in our sample fluctuated across the years, with a minimum of 2 incidents in 2009 and a peak of 18 incidents in 2006. Fluctuations in the number of testimonies of sexual violence over the years do not necessarily reflect variation in the actual extent. They may relate to the overall number of testimonies during a specific year, the number of lawyers working in PCATI, their respective experience and capacity, the relations at a given point between PCATI and other prisoner organizations who may refer cases, access provided by Israel Prison Service, among other factors. As for the spike in 2006, this was a year of increased hostilities, Lebanon war, Israeli soldier taken hostage, but this could also be related to a particularly empathetic lawyer or to a general increase in attention to the issue of sexual abuse within the organization. As for the low in 2009, this year was characterized by a decrease in collected testimonies overall. The time span between the incidents and the date of testimony ranged from 8 days to 3 years, with a median of 56 days. Testimonies include allegations toward 4 different categories of perpetrators. A. Soldiers and border police officers, 25 reports. B. Secret Service officers, 25 reports. C. Police officers, 8 reports. D. Jail officers, 9 reports. Most allegations of sexual torture or ill treatment concern situations during arrest by either soldiers or border police officers and during interrogation. Although not rare, sexual torture allegations during police arrests or during detention, either at police stations or in jail, were less frequent. In 2 cases, there was specific reference to perpetration by women, 1 Secret Service officer, 1 soldier. In all other cases, the perpetrators were identified as men or their sex was not mentioned. For various reasons, only a few of the testimonies were submitted to court, and there were no convictions of perpetrators based on any of these testimonies, though at the time of writing, 1 case is still in court. The testimonies referred to 3 broad types of sexual torture and ill treatment: verbal sexual harassment, which was most common, forced nudity, and physical sexual assault, which was least common. Following are illustrations for each type of torture, ill treatment, translated from Hebrew with the age of the victim at the time of the incident. And the alleged perpetrators' names of places are disguised. And, so... Verbal sexual harassment seems relatively widespread among Israeli security authorities. In this category, we denote verbal sexual harassment in general, threats of rape, sexual humiliation with regard to family members, threats toward family members. The Istanbul Protocol for the Investigation and Documentation of Torture states that verbal sexual threats, abuse, and mocking are also part of sexual torture, as they enhance the humiliation Its degrading aspects, all part and parcel of the procedure. There are often threats of loss of masculinity to men and consequent loss of respect in society. Reports of verbal sexual harassment include cursing, reference to victim's sexual potency. In the next incident, the detainee is shamed by relating his potency to an existing physical handicap. Quote, "He started to humiliate me and told me that because of my handicap I won't be able to have sex and that girls will not look at me." Age 29. Perpetrator was part of Secret Service. Here's another one. Quote, "The investigation included many vulgar curses about me and my family members. They told me that if I do not confess, they will do obscene things to me and my family." Quote, "And the police officer said, 'I will fuck you and you will sing on my dick,' as part of his threats." Quote, "The interrogator threatened that he will fuck me and put his hands in my ass if I won't give him a full confession and if I won't sign on all the accusations that they directed toward me." One of the interrogators said, "If you don't confess, I will put my foot into your ass." One of the two interrogators had an electric lamp with cables and told me, "If you don't confess, I'll put these electricity cables in your ass." I confessed out of fear from the electricity and for putting the cables into my behind. That's an boy age 17 right there. Sometimes the resemblance to homosexual relations was mentioned, which for many Arab men is a double offense, being raped and being like a homosexual. Quote, "And they said, 'You maniac, you son of a bitch, terrorist, I'll fuck you like a homosexual.'" Age 23. The two of them named took me to the toilet, and the one said that I'm sweet and that I better confess, since otherwise he'll ask the other to fuck me. Then they started hitting me on my face, belly, and back. Unquote. That's age 16. Oh, that's so godly, isn't it? Sexual remarks and threats regarding family members almost always concerned female family members, mother, sister, wife, or daughter. In one case, there was reference to humiliation of the father, and in another, there was a threat to rape the son of the detainee. This kind of ill treatment may be experienced as at least as severe as if the detainee were the subject of the remarks or threats. And he said, "If you will talk and sign on everything that we'll tell you, we'll treat you nice and well, and if not, we'll fuck your sister," unquote. And that kid was age 15. Secret Service is the perpetrator. In some cases, Secret Service officers brought in family members of the prisoner and threatened them sexually in front of the detainee. Quote, "And he, the interrogator, said that he'll call two people and that I have 3 minutes to talk, and if not, they will start to rape my wife. My wife started to scream and told the name of the interrogator that he is an evil man, and then he hit her with force in her face," unquote. Age 32. Could you imagine your wife, you being in that powerless situation, how powerless you'd feel? Not only did the interrogator threaten to rape your wife in front of you, but her trying to defend herself, he hits her in front of you. Imagine the kind of rage being treated like this over and over again by these scum puke faces. Kind of rage would build up. A very curious incident is the following, in which a detainee was put under pressure through a threat to his brother to have a sex change, though the circumstances are unclear. The effect was mortifying. "They put me in an interrogation room with a glass partition, and at the other side I saw my brother dressed as a woman in a miniskirt. They said that they had arranged for him a sex change surgery in Jerusalem." Age 40, so... The Istanbul Protocol states sexual torture begins with forced nudity, which in many countries is a constant factor in torture situations. An individual is never as vulnerable as when naked and helpless. Nudity enhances the psychological terror of every aspect of torture, as there is always the background of potential abuse, rape, or sodomy. Not all requested nudity of detainees is considered ill treatment. Strip searches upon entering prison are a routine part of security procedures in Israel. Thus, virtually all Palestinian detainees are strip searched, and since often they will be moved from one prison to another, this may occur more than once. During such a strip search, they are usually required to undress fully, spread their legs, and bend. It can be argued that a strip search is inherently humiliating, degrading, and harmful, and undermines basic civil and human rights. Actually, in the context of a 2015 lawsuit by an Israeli right-wing activist for damages due to a strip search imposed on him, a Jerusalem magistrate court judge, in an exceptional ruling, declared routine strip searching of all detainees before their incarceration illegal. Generally, strip searches are considered legal according to Israeli law, but the law requires that A, the detainee's consent be obtained, or in case of objection, the search is authorized in writing by an officer after providing the detainee with an opportunity to be heard, and B, the search is performed in a way that is respectful of the prisoner's health and privacy and with minimal inconvenience, pain, or hurt. Conditions such as when more individuals are unnecessarily present, or when sexually humiliating remarks are expressed during the search, or when the search is one in a series of sexually tainted incidents, mean that it could be experienced as ill treatment. Following is a common example of a routine strip search that was not according to protocol. They started to do a body search while I was completely nude. I was asked to bend and straighten. During the search, I felt that the jailers were provoking me, trying to mock me, and especially hurt my honor. Apart from strip search upon entering custody, Palestinian detainees are occasionally requested to undress, either partially or fully, during arrest or interrogation, mostly by Israeli soldiers or Secret Service agents, sometimes by police officers or jailers. Some victims described being interrogated in the nude, which makes the already frightening situation even more horrific, such as the two examples below. Quote, "In, name a person, I sat in a room where they asked me about general issues. After I took off all my clothes except my underpants, I stood with my face to the wall, and the soldier who asked me a variety of questions grabbed my neck and pressed my face to the wall. Two interrogators lifted me and pushed me to the wall. Then my trousers dropped, and I was left in my underwear, and the interrogators started to make mocking and very embarrassing remarks that included a sexual, repulsive, and humiliating aspect that I remember now in detail. A third interrogator made photographs of me in this humiliating position." That's exactly what our psychopathic scum did at prisons like Abu Ghraib to those detainees, who I believe I read 70 to 90% of them were not terrorists. They were just innocent people, just out and about or going to work, whatnot. A few victims reported that they were requested to fully undress in public places. Most likely the soldiers requested the detainees to undress for reasons of security, and not necessarily to humiliate on purpose. Nonetheless, these situations are extremely degrading. And, we know that they're a bunch of liars. We know exactly what this treatment's all about. It's about dehumanizing, degrading treatment to treat these people like animals, because it's exactly what these Israeli supremacists, fascists, think of these people. One of the soldiers threatened me with his gun and ordered me to take off all my clothes in front of all those present. The place was filled with women and men and children, because many people were waiting there to get permits to Israel, age 25. There are a number of testimonies by detainees who had to remain naked for some period of time, and over half of these cases without their underwear. The following is an example of how sexually tainted incidents can accumulate to ill treatment and torture, with forced nudity in public, interrogation in the nude, and prolonged nudity without any clear reason. Quote, "They forced me to take off all my clothes, even my underwear, in front of all the men and women who were at the place. After that, they gave me a piece of white cloth, which sticks to the body, and I remained with that, and they started to interrogate me. 4 to 6 hours after the investigation, they moved me to camp name at name. I stayed for only an hour. They moved me to prison while I am still without clothes, hiding my body with the little white cloth that they gave me when they arrested me." unquote. Age 25, perpetrator soldiers. Several detainees recounted being photographed in the nude, crossing the border of acceptable conduct. This kind of ill treatment recalls incidents at Abu Ghraib, which is, of course, what I just said. Quote, when I got off the Army Jeep at Name Place, I was nude like a baby is born, and the soldiers started to take pictures together with me. See, this is all about dehumanizing and degrading and making you feel like, it's just a form of all-out rape of the whole individual being. So being treated like this and being treated like an animal and bullied, pushed around, I couldn't imagine my life being this way from the time I get up, from the time I go to bed, with that fear. And thanks to the Christian Zionists, dumbasses, they think this is great. Many of them, they're so ignorant, they don't even know this goes on. But even if it does, even if you did tell them and they do know, because I know a few of them, their attitude is, well, I'm not going to look at that. The end is coming and Jesus Christ is coming soon. So, I'm just going to pray for them both. Whatever. What a bunch of ass-licking dupes. In most cases, there will be a lewd sexual component. In other cases, torture is targeted at the genitals. In our study, reports of sexual assault refer mostly to hits or kicks to the genitals. I was taken to a room, I don't know where, with my eyes covered. After that, they jumped on my hands. And they were stretched to the sides, and I got a strong blow in my testicles. The interrogator name was sitting opposite to me while feet cuffed and put his foot on my genitals and pressed and kicked my testicles. One testimony concerned simulated rape, which was considered highly demeaning. One of the undercover soldiers lay down on me and started to caress my bottom as if he was having sex with me, and he started to move his hips and genitals while making sounds. At that point, I tried to fight him with all my strength, but my hands were tight behind me, and I wasn't able to. When this undercover soldier got up from me, another came, and he too started to caress me on my genitals and buttocks. He tried to take off my trousers, but I kicked him with my feet. They then hit me on all parts of my body with their hands and feet. Of all cases reviewed in this study, the following case from 2007 of an actual rape with a blunt object is the only one in which the victim's complaint was not rejected by the authorities. At the time of writing this article, it is still in court. They took off my trousers and underwear and shoved a pole into my behind. Oh my God. They stopped when someone came in and asked what they were doing. A little later, the officer took me to the toilet, locked the door, and sat me down and urinated on my face and body. Well, God's chosen people at work. So, yeah, you can read this, find this, and I can post the link to this. So, but with the testimonies, yeah. This is from Democracy Now! Years ago. Ex-Abu Ghraib interrogator. Israelis trained U.S. to use Palestinian chair torture device. See if this will play. This is kind of old, so...
The the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Our guest is Eric Fair, Army veteran who worked as a contract interrogator at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, as well as other places. He's the author of the new book, Consequence, a Memoir. You've said that what happened outside Abu Ghraib, what contractors did in terms of torture, was often worse than inside Abu Ghraib.
That was certainly my experience, and again, I'm focusing on my own sort of behavior and my own sort of actions. So for me, yes, personally, Fallujah was worse than Abu Ghraib.
So why don't you read for us from your book, Consequence?
We passed by the interrogation room where Tyner has been working on Rad Hussein. We haven't heard Tyner scream or throw anything today. The door to the room, a flimsy sheet of plywood, has blown open in the hot desert wind. Inside, Rad Hussein is bound to the Palestinian chair. His hands are tied to his ankles. The chair forces him to lean forward in a crouch, forcing all of his weight onto his thighs. It's as if he's been trapped in the act of kneeling down to pray. His knees frozen just above the floor, his arms pinned below his legs. He is blindfolded. His head has collapsed into his chest. He wheezes and gasps for air. There's a pool of urine at his feet. He moans, too tired to cry, but in too much pain to remain silent. Henson comes out into the hallway and walks past the room. He covers the side of his face as he walks by, and he says, "I don't even want to know. I am silent. This is a sin. I know it as soon as I see it. There will be no atonement for it. In the coming years, I won't have the audacity to seek it." Witnessing a man being tortured in the Palestinian chair requires the witness to either seek justice or cover his face. Like Henson in Fallujah, I'll spend the rest of my life covering my face.
That's Eric Fair, author of Consequence, a Memoir. Why did they call it the Palestinian chair?
I was never clear on the actual origin. The rumors within the interrogation cell were that Army interrogators had learned to use this chair by Israeli interrogators, and the Israeli interrogators presumably called it the Palestinian chair because they were torturing Palestinians in it. I certainly don't know if that's true, and quite frankly, from my own story, I'm not sure that it necessarily matters.
Well, in the book, you write that interrogators in Iraq said the Israeli military taught them how to use the Palestinian chair during a joint training exercise. In response to this revelation in your book, Sarah Leah Whitson of Human Rights Watch said, quote, "The description by an American interrogator of a Palestinian chair torture device that he says the Israeli military taught U.S. soldiers how to use is disturbing and shameful on more than one level, suggesting as it does a means of torture used against Palestinian detainees, eagerly copied by Americans seeking to interrogate and torture Iraqis." So could you talk about that, and also whether you know if the Palestinian chair was used outside Fallujah in other sites in Iraq?
There were a variety of different ways to interrogate someone under what were being called enhanced interrogation. One of those enhanced interrogation techniques was confined spaces, and we know now that that was used by putting people in boxes and eventually putting insects in the box, and as well as closets. The Palestinian chair was simply a confined space. It was a way, rather than putting someone in a box and confining them inside, was to essentially confine them with the chair. And it was designed, like all enhanced interrogation techniques, to simply break the will, to simply break them down physically in this case, and then essentially break their will.
And you also sat in the Palestinian chair. Could you talk about what that experience was like?
I did. Recognizing that there was an actual device that we were using in interrogation was... I was surprised by that, and so a close friend of mine and I made sure that I think we had, at one point had been tempted to use it. I did not use the chair, and that's not to suggest that I wouldn't if I hadn't stayed longer. But we thought that if we were going to use it, we should sit in it, and we should get a sense for what it was. And so we strapped each other in, and it locks you into what is essentially a squat, a permanent squat from which you can't recover. We only lasted about a minute. And physically, we certainly could have lasted longer, but it's the overwhelming sense of fear that a horrific sort of pain is on its way. And because your hands are bound, you recognize that there's no way to recover from it. So certainly the physical pain is excruciating, but the mental and sort of emotional strain of knowing that you can't, there's simply no way to recover from that is what amounted to torture.
Eric, can you describe what torture session you engaged in haunts you most?
I wish that I could say one thing haunts me most, and I wish it were limited to one, but the entire experience And I know other interrogators disagree with me vehemently on this, but the very act of simply forcing a detainee to violate his own will through interrogation is, in my mind, torture. The one that certainly has, and appears in the book and has appeared in other articles that I've written, is the sleep deprivation I participated in Fallujah. It was actually my last night in Fallujah. I'd been tasked to go back to Baghdad the next day to form another team. And another interrogator was working a sleep deprivation on a detainee. He was on the day shift, I was on the night shift. And so when I came in, he asked me to, throughout the course of the night, every hour, to wake this detainee up, or this, I try to use the word prisoner, to wake this prisoner up.
Talk about the difference between detainee and prisoner. Why you?
Sure. Well, shifting gears, as a police officer, I could detain people almost as I saw fit, and in some ways to protect them. I could detain someone on the street if I thought that they were going to cross in the wrong spot, or I could detain someone who had just blown through a stop sign. That was not necessarily an arrest. Iraqis were not detainees. We were not detaining them. They were prisoners of war. Now, I recognize that people say we didn't declare war, but anyone who was in Iraq in any of those years, to include right now, it's a war. They were prisoners.
It was an invasion. It had nothing to do with 9/11, but okay. So, oh, yeah, so I was looking up a little bit on the Abu Ghraib thing, but that's, well, and we all know this is all a part of the New World Order agenda, this current genocide attempt, anyways. The Israel-Hamas war and the New World Order. There is one article that I lost in all these articles. I'm trying to, is it down here? Okay, it's right here. I wanted to read this before I read that, but, you know, I guess I just didn't do it. But this came out today, or, yeah, the 24th. Israel pounds Gaza ahead of truce, killing and injuring dozens. The air raids hit UN school, Indonesian hospital, and residential buildings across Gaza. Jesus. Look at that. And all these evangelical Zionists, are on board with all this going on. Some of them are cheering. Some out of this group might be Christian. Dozens of Palestinians have been killed and hundreds wounded as Israeli forces step up attacks in Gaza in advance of the truce that came into effect on Friday morning. The Gaza Ministry of Health reported on Thursday 27 fatalities from a strike on the Abu Hussein school, run by the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. The school in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza was housing many displaced Palestinians. No Hamas there. Israeli forces also launched fresh attacks on the Indonesian hospital. Well, I'm sure that was a Hamas base, is what they're going to say. Targeting the main entrance and power generators. Ashraf al-Qudra, the ministry spokesperson, said the hospital had come under intense bombardment and that large parts of the building were being targeted. More than 200 patients, medical staff, internally displaced people were currently at the hospital, which has been under siege for a week. The Palestinian death toll from Israeli attacks in the Gaza Strip has soared to 14,854. The government media office in a blockaded enclave said on Thursday about 7,000 people remain unaccounted for, including more than 4,700 children, the media office said. Palestinian medic and civilians carry an injured man after Israeli strike in Rafah. A Palestinian is saved from under the rubble of a destroyed building after Israeli army airstrikes in Rafah. Oh my God, look at that. Palestinians, including children injured in airstrikes, have been taken to Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in the central town of Deir al-Balah. Al-Bala, Gaza for treatment. Oh my God. How can you look at this child here and not and cheer that? You know, I'm starting to change my whole mind about Christianity 100% totally, you know. I used to kind of be semi on the fence. I was sort of on the preterist camp. That's the Christian groups that believe that all this end time shit was fulfilled by 70 AD. And of course there's loaded full of evidence in the New Testament and in the Old that's kind of the fact, at least the majority of it. But still, I mean, you go back to some of the Old Testament passages where, Yahweh is commanding the killing of infants and children, and you look at these children here. I mean, how can you look at that and claim you have a soul and a heart and cheer this? Or, what another thing I'm noticing they're doing is that they're just giving Hamas all the credit for all this. They're saying that, Hamas is the ones that are doing all this, and Hamas is prohibiting these people from evacuating. Hamas, the creature of Israel. Look at that. Poor kids. My heart goes out to these people. View of the damage of the El Shafi Mosque. Of course, this is not terrorism or genocide. It's, Israel defending themselves. Search for bodies. So, but all those psychopathic dickheads, they take their inspiration from the Bible, their interpretation of it. And I was going to really get into that maybe by the next video, whatnot, because there's a lot to cover on that. But I did this a long time ago. I done a video with this on this article a long time ago. So you'll actually hear this rabbi who did this article use that New World Order phrase in this article. The Noahide laws, the Sanhedrin during this Messianic era, the Supreme Jewish Law Court of 71 sages will be reestablished and will decide on all matters of law. Oh, isn't that nice? Could you imagine the hell this world would be if they had these nutbags run it? So all the nations of the world is right here. What will become of the world as we know it? All the nations of the world will strive to create a new world order. Of course, there's always promise of peace. I've read from a rabbi that's long gone, long been dead, Baal HaSalam or whatever. That's what his rabbi name was anyways. I read from several of his stuff where he was pro-communist and this coming kingdom of God, whatever, was, going to be a communist state. So there you go. So I just wanted to share this, and I'll be sharing more because I want to show how, God's chosen people, as, the evangelicals are teaching, are, just a bunch of psychopaths that have turned into the very group that they claimed persecuted them and genocided them. So, yep, that's it for now.